Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Now you can probably tell straight away that this isn't going to be a normal tutorial, but this did come at a request. This video is all about how to run a cake workshop. Now I know many of you are enthusiastic bakers and cake decorators, and some of you may be deciding that you want to start teaching all those skills that you've learned over the last few years. Now, for those who don't know, I've been running workshops for quite a few years now, and I'm talking in-person workshops, which later became virtual. I'll get to that. And you may want to know how to start out yourselves. So hopefully this video will be extremely helpful. Before we get into the video, if you haven't already, it will mean everything to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and head to my channel for all my other tutorials where you can learn tips and techniques of cake decorating. Now, let's get into business. Firstly, why? Why do you want to start teaching? For me, people were asking, they were asking for these workshops. They wanted me to teach the skills that I was promoting of myself on Instagram and YouTube. And so that was the reason why I started teaching. Before this, I've never taught. I never thought I'd be a teacher, and look where I am today after a few years of teaching, both online and in person, and I've absolutely fallen in love with it. Don't get me wrong, whilst as rewarding as it is, it's not an easy job, and there's a lot of things to take into consideration. Now, obviously, I'm going to be speaking specifically about cake decorating, but I think this goes for if you're holding a workshop in general. You need to find the perfect place to do it. Now, if you're lucky enough to have a large space of your own that you can kit out perfectly, I think that's everyone's dream. But if you're looking for an external space, there's quite a few things that you need to bear in mind. Firstly, it was really important for me and my workshops that I had access to at least one oven, a hob where I can heat things up because that's how I make my buttercream, and of course, stand mixers. Now, if I was hosting a class, for example, for 10 people, which doesn't actually sound that much, I'd have to make sure that there were enough mixers in the place. Now, I own 3 or 4 mixers, I think, which is obviously more than the average person. But to start taking them to another location is quite a lot of work, so it's much easier if they already have. Now, depending on where you are in the world, I wish I can tell you exactly where to look, but my first instincts were looking at kitchens and existing cooking schools because they usually are kitted out pretty much anyway. Now, for cake decorating specifically, you do need more specific utensils such as side scrapers and turntables, which maybe not everyone has. So if you're serious about starting up workshops, it's worth investing. You don't have to spend loads of money on these, but it will help. The place itself also has to be accessible. So depending on where your audience is based, there's no point in having it 4-hour drive away in the middle of nowhere because no one's gonna come. So just try your best to make it a really accessible location, maybe with a train station nearby or parking. So that's probably the best advice that I can give on the location. So my next point is getting into marketing and ticket sales. But before I do that, I've experienced in the past, wherever I hold workshops, different ways of selling my tickets. So if I go to a cooking school, for example, that already runs lessons, sometimes they're happy to split profit with me or pay me a certain fee, or I've also done just a dry hire of the place and then everything is on me. So there's not one way of doing this. The nice thing is that if you do it in collaboration with another place that may also have already a reputation or an audience, you can split the marketing between you and potentially reach new audiences through the place you're going to be hosting. So let's talk about getting the word out, marketing yourself, which is probably the hardest thing to do. Like I said, if there's people already asking for the workshop, get in touch with them directly. I usually star or flag emails that are asking specific questions, such as when is your next workshop, etc. And then when I have one coming up, I can go directly to that person. I think it's kind of like cold calling. When someone specific is interested, you can go back to that specific person. Now, hopefully most of you will have an Instagram or website where you promote yourself and your work. I think another important thing is to also have a newsletter. Not everyone sees everything online anymore, as frustrating as it is. So when you're trying to promote a workshop on Instagram and it only gets X amount of likes and maybe not all of your followers have seen it, a newsletter will reach those followers that may not have seen it on social media. So don't underestimate a newsletter, they work really well. So obviously an important point when marketing in general, this isn't necessarily for workshops, but you want to stand out. You want to give people the reason why to come to your workshop. What are they going to learn? Which is another point that I want to make, is to make the workshop unique to yourself. Just like you would in cake decorating in general, you find your own style, you find your own strengths. People will come to learn from you, so make sure it's going to be worth it for them. There are loads of cake teachers out there and people come for the individual experience because you can probably learn the same sort of techniques pretty much anywhere you go. So make sure what you're offering is independent and specific to you, and don't try and be anyone else because it's just gonna backfire. And I think that's just, in general, stay true to yourself anyway. So you've got this wonderful workshop idea, you've understood how you want to run it, you've got the place to do it, and people want to buy tickets. Now again, there's not one way of doing this. It depends what kind of website you have. If you've got an e-commerce website and you can just list tickets and people purchase through that directly. If you're doing it with another school and they have their own website, maybe it's easier for them to process the tickets and then you can get paid from them. Again, not one way. I myself have a PayPal account, and I think even though there are quite a few fees to include in your pricing, it's the easiest and most straightforward way to be paid. So especially if someone's coming from abroad as well. It's just easier to get paid through PayPal, really. When it comes to what type of workshop you want to be offering as well, think of it as how much attention span does the average person have? So just to put it into perspective, because I've done quite a few different kinds of workshops, I've done courses that go on for several days, maybe over a few weeks. I've done 3 to 4 hour classes or longer day classes. And again, it depends on the cake that you're teaching, because some cakes take longer than others, and that will also determine your pricing. So pricing is one of these big questions. Again, there's no right or wrong answer. If you're totally stuck on how much you should be charging, do look at your competitors. I don't mean that in a negative way, just other people who are doing it. Maybe you can look at people who are more experienced than you because their prices are probably higher. I remember starting out at charging 70 or 75 pounds for a ticket, and now I'm charging 170 to 250 pounds, depending on the workshop I'm giving. So you can see, I know that was over a course of a few years, you can see the difference in the pricing just from the experience. You also need to take into account all of your equipment and ingredient costs. Obviously the equipment is more of an investment, but the ingredients, if you have to make cakes in advance or if you have to order things, etc., all of those should be included in your ticket prices. And I think just going over that point of the equipment again, I think it's really important that if someone's paying quite a lot of money to be at a workshop, they deserve to have their own equipment. So I prefer it when every single person has their own turntable, palette knife, side scraper, etc. Sometimes I have to share mixers depending on the location, but I would always either make buttercream in advance or just make sure everyone is doing as much as they can, because otherwise they'd just be paying for a demonstration, and that's not what they're there to do. And I think my final point about teaching is the actual teaching side of things. And every class I teach, I learn something else, because you actually learn a lot from the students. So I think a piece of advice that I would give is that if you are new to teaching, then do a couple of practice runs, maybe ask a few friends if they're happy to just take part in a group. Of course, that's going to be at your own expense, but in the long run, it will be worth it. Maybe offer a few free tickets, maybe do a giveaway of a ticket, especially if it's one of your first classes and people haven't necessarily heard of your classes before and you're finding it a bit more difficult to fill up the places. People love free stuff. So offer free things and they will come. Your first class is always going to be a total mess. Things will go wrong. That's fine. You're only human, and a lot of the time I actually say, if things go wrong, it's good to learn from, because that's the reality of working in a kitchen. Things still go wrong for me, not so much in workshops anymore because I've kind of got used to it, but as soon as I go to a new place, something happens out of my control because it's a new environment and, you know, maybe the music isn't working and I like music. I don't know. So don't get put off if things go wrong. It's totally normal and you will get better. So I think the last point I'm gonna make is how much you should look after your students. They've put a lot of trust in you to come to your workshop. They have spent the time and the money, and I think it's only fair to chase them up after the workshop, maybe send them all the recipe cards. If you do have a place on your own, you know, a Google review is always helpful, or any testimonial as well, because you can use that to promote your next class. And at the end of the day, I think word of mouth is the strongest tool. So if you're nice to your students, if they've had a good time, you're guaranteed either return customers or new customers that know someone who's been for your next workshop. And I think finally, if you are considering hosting a cake workshop, I think you should do it. It's really fun and it's so rewarding. To sit at the end of a class and look at 8 to 10 or more cakes that have been made purely from your guidance is probably the most rewarding thing. It does take a lot of patience, especially for more beginner cake decorators, but again, it's a total learning curve and I definitely recommend it. Now, I think I've covered quite a few aspects of what to take into consideration when planning a cake workshop. If you have another question that's specific to this and I didn't cover, please write it in the comments and I will do my best to get back to you. And in the meantime, please subscribe to my channel, like this video, and if there's any other tutorials or even discussions that you want to hear or see, then comment below. I hope you enjoyed it and we'll see you very soon.